Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I am naturopath Fiona Chin, co-founder of Kidney Coach and Kaigenesis, a range of supplements designed to support people diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, whether you want to lower your creatinine or raise your eGFR. And I'm joined again today by the amazing, wonderful, beautiful Jessianna Saville. Jessianna is the CEO. Do I call you CEO, boss lady of K&I? Kidney Nutritional Institute. Do I get to call you boss lady, CEO?
Sure, you could call me that, maybe founder. I don't know.
Founder.
I mean, we all work pretty unilaterally. I guess we're small and always work together, so it's hard to feel like the boss. Actually, mostly everyone else bosses me around. I just like pull the trigger on it to pay the bills.
I love
So,
it. So Jess runs or is the founder of Kidney Nutritional Institute, which is an amazing group of like-minded renal dietitians who are very forward-thinking when it comes to all things kidney disease. And if you've been watching the channel ever, you will have met Lindsay and a whole pile of the team from K&I on there. They're regulars. And if you're hopefully watching our series on amino acids, which is what this is about, Jessianna and I have been working our way through the amino acids and their role individually when it comes to kidney disease and chronic kidney disease, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions or misunderstanding about protein. Do we protein restrict when it comes to kidney disease? Do we do that in the later phases? What about keto analogues? And Jessianna and I both were just really fascinated about, is it, what individual amino acids do? And, we've been always surprised even just how glutamine can donate in and, boost glucose levels. And so it's no good if you've got PKD and things like that. Just the way that these amino acids work are really fascinating. So we're on to a new amino acid today, methionine, which is also quite fascinating in its role. So I'm going to hand this one over to you, Jessianna. So first off, methionine, tell me a high level overview about this amino acid, what we would generally use it for, where it's supplemented, and how it works in the body. And then we'll dig into CKD and its role from there.
okay, great. Yeah, amino acids, they are fascinating. And I think the question is always how do we just get better results, for all those patients that get great results. As clinicians, we always have a few that we're like, man, we don't know why you're not doing well. And I think a lot of the key is amino acids. So this is like, I think for you and me, it's kind of this, we're so curious about it. This is our way to focus, figure it out. But methionine is an essential amino acid, which means you have to consume it from your diet in some way because your body's not going to make it for the processes that it needs. Uh, just on like a real basic level, amino acids are the building blocks for like everything in your body. They're really, really essential. I think the analogy I was just telling you that I think of sometimes is our body runs in pathways, right? That food A turns into all these nutrients, the nutrient goes here, and then this nutrient turns into all these other little things till eventually it can get used by our cells and our mitochondria or wherever to create energy or hormones or hair or, all the things that our body needs. And amino acids are kind of like the boat, and the nutrients, these little micronutrients, are the river. So
I love that analogy.
you're going to see amino acids in so many processes, important processes in our body. And so when we look at an essential amino acid like methionine, which we're going to talk about, what you see with all of these is that if you have too much, it's going to create certain issues. And if you have too little, it's going to create certain issues. It's kind of like if you had a giant boat on a tiny little stream, you're going to block the river. But also, if your boat's like super duper tiny, you don't have anything, you can't carry anything important down that river either. So there's always a balance point with all of these. Now, methionine's an interesting one because it is heavily used in a lot of processes, but one of the important processes is methylation. And methylation you'll see come up again and again and again and again because it has to do with aging. It has to do with our body being able to get rid of toxins, which is really huge in the kidney world because our kidneys are one of the five toxin filters. um, and so methionine is one definitely of interest. You'll see it in this aging, anti-aging world as well. because it is used in so many of those critical processes.
Yeah, and exactly that. And it's funny, I was saying to you before, and if I go through my cupboard with supplements, you find a lot of the multis in Australia at least, and a lot of the things that people take for like mood boosting and
Oh yeah.
because methylation and methionine super cofactors for a lot of your neurotransmitters and things like that. You'll find methionine in a lot of supplements, and I know when I'm going through and putting patient, scripts together, I always have to cross-check formulas to make sure I'm not overloading them on B6 being a big one, but methionine often I'm like, oh wow, it's in like 5 different formulas. So it is easy if you're not checking, or if you've got a practitioner, or you've seen, you're going to the health food store and grabbing something, seeing a dietitian, that you can OD on, because it might, well, again, it might be an Australian thing. We
It's
tend to
all
add,
over. Yeah.
yeah, we add little bits of methionine to everything. So if someone, so let's go through, when are the times that someone might be prescribed methionine?
This is a good question. Okay, so couple things real quick, and I missed actually one really important one, and that's how it's an antioxidant. So it helps make cysteine, which is then needed for glutathione, which is basically like the big dog antioxidant in our body, and it protects our cells from damage. So because it's a methylator and antioxidant and detoxifier, you see it in a lot of, that's why it shows up in all these formulas, because it's really huge in these like big core pathways that are focused on in the functional world or in the biohacking world. But to your question, why might you be prescribed methionine? So especially more in the holistic space, S adenosylmethionine,
Sammy, we'll just
SAME.
call it Sammy.
I'll just give you the long name, right? SAME is a very popular supplement for clinicians to utilize because it can really help with the neurotransmitters. It helps with the serotonin and dopamine and like production of these. So when people are dealing with a lot of mental health and they're trying to treat it naturally, they may see uh SAME. I always say it wrong because when I read it, I just read it as SAME. But so that's one place where you'll see it quite a bit. You'll also see it quite a bit in um, hormone protocols when they're
Mhm.
trying to balance hormones, because it helps with some of the detoxification phases in the liver of estrogen in particular. So when you see people that are trying to treat a lot of estrogen dominance, you'll see SAMe in that one also, or methionine, because methionine's like the precursor to all that. And so
Yeah.
sometimes you just get prescribed methionine.
Yeah, that's definitely where I would see it in the mental health, and you're absolutely right, treating estrogen. And I'm thinking of a couple of big formulas I use for estrogen detox, which is a big problem in our world due to plastics and oral contraceptives and all those kind of things. And they've
Yeah.
all got methionine in there, in big doses too. I'm not talking small doses, I'm talking pretty decent doses. So, okay, so now let's dig into methionine and kidney disease. Is there a specific role? Like, is there, we know that it detoxes estrogen, it's a very heavy liver, works on like sort of phase 2 mostly in the liver. Is there a time, and we know about the liver kidney sort of pathway, is there something specific about methionine being therapeutic in kidney disease or any types of the kidney diseases?
Mm. So you don't see so much it used therapeutically where there's like, oh, you have this type of kidney disease. So we're going to particularly pick on methionine versus other amino acids that we've looked at. They're like used in little studies. You actually don't see that so much with methionine. It's interesting because when your kidney is like breaking down different things, one of the things that doesn't get broken down very well is creatinine, right? That's why your creatinine goes high, right? Creatinine will just kind of sit in your blood and then it's going to be in your urine, and that shows a problem. What's really interesting is that homocysteine, which I'll bring that back to methionine in a second, it is actually reabsorbed in the renal tubules very, very easily. So actually with people with later stage kidney disease, their homocysteine levels and their methionine levels tend to be a little bit high. And they are linked together because if you can't methylate, you actually can't break homocysteine down. And so people will have these kind of higher methionine and these higher homocysteine levels, which for CKD is an issue because high homocysteine has a very, very strong connection to these cardiovascular events that we see with CKD. Um, and these higher homocysteine levels, and I want to tell you about this study that's really, really fascinating in diabetic rats with kidney disease. But these higher methionine levels, it looks like they might be blocking some of the pathways of autophagy. They might be blocking some of these pathways or like promoting some pathways of cell destruction, which is really, really fascinating. And so that, is another thing where it's like, well, it would make sense. Like a lower
Mm.
protein diet, you're able to lower levels of maybe homocysteine and levels of methionine. That's another pathway where low protein diets work.
Yeah, and it's funny. I remember reading a study really early on when I was doing the rabbit hole of CKD, and that it was a high percentage of people with end stage renal failure, let's say stages 5, but I think they included 4, and they had elevated homocysteine. It's quite a common thing that we see. And of course, then people know about the MTHFR genes and the ability to methylate and all of those things, and the need for all those cofactors. And we were talking before we hit record that if you are on a low protein diet, which we do often prescribe an end stage, especially if you've got elevated bun and things like that, that we might be, putting you on a low protein diet, you're going to get deficient
Yeah.
in all, not necessarily folate. Folate's very high in obviously green leafies, but you'll be deficient in potentially B12, B6, which are other cofactors that go into the methylation pathway because you're on a low protein diet. So yeah, it's really fascinating how that all goes together. And then obviously folate in particular can jam methylation pathways if you're supplementing with supplemental folate versus methylated folate, which is what you need if you've got MTHFR gene. So it starts to get really, really tricky with all of that. And to your point, I would say as clinicians, we should always be checking people's homocysteine levels and end stage for everything that you said, preventing these big cardiovascular events that happen. So walk me through then methionine, and do we go, well, because then I go, well, then we might just chuck in methionine because it might help with homocysteine, or is it going to feed that pathway? Is it going to help that pathway? Why would we be thinking that homocysteine is either good or bad in end stage when we are seeing people with elevated homocysteine levels, which we are, there's going to be a large percentage in end stage kidney disease with that marker? Did I make any
So
sense there, Jess? I feel like I talked
yeah,
around
I think
the
yeah. So why wouldn't we just add in methionine, right? Like why not
yeah.
use this tool to like kind of maybe help out some methylation pathways, etc. I get it. So let me share this study, which, like, as I go through this, I'm looking at studies. And to be fair, there's not a ton of studies on methionine and CKD, probably because the preliminary studies said it's maybe not super worthwhile to study it, except for on avoiding excess. Okay, so here's this really interesting study. So this was a study where they took diabetic so they took rats and they had diabetic kidneys and they were a little bit and they were obese. And what they did is they put these rats on a low protein diet and then they supplemented them with methionine only that amino acid. So it was a low protein diet exclusively with a methionine supplement. Now, one thing I just want to point out in any of these animal studies, and I never know until I talk to the researcher, but the amount that they supplement these creatures sometimes is like an exorbitant amount that no human would ever take. Like it would be like a crazy amount. And I don't know on this particular study. So we're just going on some principles here. Um, I put that caution in there because sometimes we can put big danger signals on things, but actually in a small amount, it's not a big deal. But in the amounts, of course, that these animals are given, it's like
Yeah.
a big problem. But here's what was so incredibly fascinating in this study. So they put these rats on this low protein diet, and then they have ones that are low protein diet supplement with methionine. And what they saw is that in all the rats that had this low protein diet that was supplemented with methionine, basically any benefit that you would have got from the low protein diet, which would have been antioxidative, like impact, or like decreasing inflammation, or decreasing fibrosis. Like fibrosis to me is like the magic ticket. When we figure out how to really address that, we're going to make leaps and bounds with kidney disease in particular. So, but these three things that you see happen in a low protein diet, the methionine like cleared the slate. Those didn't even happen at all, which is really, really fascinating with just one amino acids that they totally abrogated the whole impact of this low protein diet. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's kind of blows my brain. Like just
it's
one amino acid and
very
low protein
interesting.
doesn't work.
And what they saw happen is that when they added the methionine, they had an increase in the SAM molecule, not SAMe, but they just in the SAM molecule because that's made from methionine. And what happened then, when you have like this really higher level of SAM, then you end up having an overactivation of growth pathways like mTOR, right? Which is linked to aging and disease. So when you see like fasting, mTOR shows up because it helps with autophagy, like this mTOR pathway is really, really interesting. It's very interesting in ADPKD also. The other thing that they saw with these higher SAM levels is that they blocked the autophagy process. So that's the process where our cells kind of clean out the broken pieces and so they can actually function better. It totally blocked that pathway, and that's really critical, especially if you have this lower kidney function. You want every single cell that you have available and living in your kidneys to be working optimally, because
Mm.
there is a portion of your kidneys you'll never regenerate right now that we know, but the pieces that are working, you don't want them to be working halfway. You want them to be working as well as they can, all the cells, and that's where you really can get some uh, minimization of continued decline, or like stabilization, or even improvement in some cases.
Yeah, also find that so fascinating. Yeah, just it. And so then my question comes to, because I know this is a question that people watching that have watched other videos will have. Then what about keto analogues? Because we're going to have levels of all the amino acids in keto analogues, including methionine. Obviously, for people that don't know, what happens with a keto analog, we supplement them in a low protein diet to make sure people are getting enough amino acids, but keto analogs have had the nitrogen portion removed, and that's obviously what's contributing to elevated bun levels and protein spillage is this nitrogen. So we supplement with amino acids with the nitrogen portion removed. We call them keto analogues to make sure people have still got the building blocks, so we don't cause people to have massive amounts of protein deficiency where their hair falls out and they become malnourished. So keto analogues, they've still got methionine in there. So what happens with the methionine part then with the keto
Oh,
analog?
yeah, that was a good question. In fact, when I read this study, again, like I've never really thought too much about that piece, but when I read that study, I was like, oh, I hope the keto analogs don't have any methionine. But then when I went and looked at it a little bit closer, the keto analogs do have methionine in them, but don't throw them away. And they're very expensive, so don't throw them away. But you need to have a little bit, and it has enough to help with deficiency, but it shouldn't have too much to be driving some of those negative impacts that you saw. However, I would say, and whether or not you're taking a keto analog, honestly, I think this is good standard practice, because I do see a lot of people get into trouble with the type of vitamins they're taking, because they're kind of taking stuff from the store and they're kind of junky and they're not great if you're a poor methylator. But if you have it in your homocysteine or MMA level, to understand, like, can I convert B12 or folate into a usable form, or is it just sitting in my blood causing problems? Those are really standard labs. They're not unusual labs. Pretty much 99% of my patients, their doctors will draw them B12 homocysteine MMA level for us. And it's nice to know if you need to be careful with what type of B12 you're using or what type of folate. And are you looking at your products? Do you have a cereal that's being fortified with folic acid? Like that's not going to be good if you're a poor methylator. And then you're taking a supplement that has just a small amount of methionine in it. You want to have all the cofactors, B6, B12, folate, to help be able to use that in the right pathways of methylation because you're not going to have very much if you're on a low protein diet. But conversely, on the other side, it goes both ways. If you're like kind of a normal protein diet, you still want to make sure you're methylating well because you need to make sure you're not going to have a buildup of methionine. So on the low level, you want to make sure you can use what you have well, and on like a normal level where maybe it could get too high, you want to make sure you have all the cofactors to get rid of it and not to have it create problems.
And I want to come back to something you just said with it, methionine will stimulate the growth pathway. So that obviously is going to be a big issue in people with PKD. So talk to me about methionine and PKD.
Yeah, so this was a fun one for me to look at. I'm gonna just pull up my study. So I have a bunch of notes here. So if you see me looking down at my screen or across, that's what I'm doing. Okay, so what I love when we're digging into these amino acids, I've seen this now, I don't know if it's my second or third amino acid, but there's studies specifically on PKD and a specific amino acid versus like CKD. And the reason why is because PKD is so different, right? This is not the same as every kidney disease because a driving factor of PKD is cell growth, right? And you think of it similar to cancer, right? If you're pushing things that are going to cause cell growth, like, glucose, which stimulates insulin, which is a growth hormone, then you're going to have an expansion of that disease. So there was one study, this was in 2021, and there is a whole new pathway I have not ever heard about. And that's, I wish I was like a microbiologist sometimes so I could understand this better, but I'm a very, like, not as smart as a microbiologist dietitian. But they talk about this pathway. It's called the metal 3 pathway, more or less. And I don't want to get into all of that because you probably can't explain it very well. Anyways, but what ended up happening in this pathway with methionine kind of drove this, they call it an epitranscriptomic pathway, whatever that means. Um, but so the mechanism is that this metal 3, which is driven by methionine, and again, we get methionine from a lot of red meats. There's certain plant foods that have quite a bit of methionine anyways. But so when you have an increase in this metal 3, it increases a methylation pathway, right? Which then pulls down into the CAMP pathway, which promotes cyst growth. So it's like 3 steps back into how it's promoting cyst growth, and eventually it's going to dump into the CAMP pathway. However, what they saw is that they did, again, this was in mice, but they specifically restricted methionine, and they saw that slowed the progression of ADPKD. Now, how do I pull that back into practical information? Because I don't think you can just say, hey, like restrict your protein a whole bunch and you're going to see your ADPKD improve because you won't have as much methionine. That does not run consistent with the studies that we see because we actually don't see across the board that a protein restriction is helping ADPKD. When I look at this and I think about it a little bit beyond just like reduce methionine, so reduce protein, right? Instead, actually, what I think is optimize methylation so that we can effectively use methionine. But if you're in a situation where you're working on mental health and you're using, alternative methods, Or if you're looking at hormones and maybe you're with a holistic practitioner and they're using SAMe or methionine or other products, just keep your eye on that piece because it could, like, if you're front loading with like an extra dose of it in your body outside of just dietary, I think that's going to be a big issue. In addition, I would say that methylation is a really, really critical process, in particular for PKD, and you see it in this pathway that methionine is involved in. So, and again, like pulling it back, why is that so fascinating? When you look at a single amino acid, you can't say, okay, cut that amino acid out, except for glutamine. We decided don't do it
Yeah.
with PKD. But what you can say is this amino acid is really involved in this pathway. And like now let's think about all the ways we're seeing this pathway in other situations. The amino acid just kind of like put this big magnifying glass on the pathway, and then you think like, oh, that pathway is super important. Like that's not one to just be laissez-faire about. Like you really want to make sure if you have ADPKD that you are methylating correctly and you're not having excess. If you're a poor methylator, you're not taking forms of B12 or folate, and you've got the right forms of it, and you're eating like an abundance of these foods that help your methylation pathways.
Yeah, I think that's
That's
so
my take home.
important. Yeah, I know. I from pre-recording and looking at it, that's my takeaway as well. I mean, it's so hard to isolate amino acids because we never do things in isolation. But it's so super interesting with these studies, and also as you mentioned, often these studies are using whacking big doses that we would never use in a
Yeah,
clinical
yeah.
setting in humans anyway. So it's always hard to know. But I think definitely we decided no glutamine in PKD, and with methionine, really it comes down to if you were going to supplement that, maybe the first thing to do is actually look at methylation, check your MTHFR genes, MTRR, check your homocysteine, maybe optimize methylation first. And you may not need to be using methionine potentially in the first place, and then, yeah, work backwards from there.
Yeah, and I guess one other thing I just pull in from this PKD perspective that's been on my mind. So, because for very proactive patients, especially there's a lot of buzz around ketogenic diets, and I mean we use ketogenic diets. Maybe we were part of some of the controversy, and I don't know because we've been using them since the research came out. um in the like there's keto diets, and then in the keto world it's like, hey, if you're like carnivore keto, you're like the extra cool keto person versus like regular keto, you're not quite as cool. I don't know, it's like kind of a interesting culture dynamic in the keto world. If you're in the keto world, I mean no offense, it's just what I've seen a little bit. um but the one thing when I think about what we just have been learning about with methionine for our ADPKD people that go heavy carnivore, maybe in some situations that's okay. But if you actually start thinking about the pathways now and you're thinking about carnivore and methylation, now if you're on a carnivore diet and you also an expert methylation, please like let's connect because I want to understand. But to me, a carnivore diet and a poor methylator, that's going to work okay for a while, but eventually I get concerned because it's quite low in folate in particular. And I just think about like some of our folks that have done these heavy meat keto diets. And I used to always be like, oh, it's because like you're in like all those like uremic toxins, all the heavy protein on your kidneys. That's why you're not doing well. But these are people with kidney function like 60, 70, 80. And now I'm wondering, after looking through this lens, if maybe in some situations where you go too heavy on meat and you haven't supported methylation concurrently, or you got cruddy B vitamins or whatever, that's like a really bad recipe for PKD in particular. That's what I'm kind of thinking.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I like keto carnivore short term to reset stuff. And I think also the microbiome reset will play a role in how the gut ferments and
Oh,
metabolizes
that's
B
a good
vitamins.
point.
I've seen
Yeah.
some research on that. So I think that's why people can get away with it. But I'm yet to meet, and I know, I'm happy to be wrong, but I have yet to meet anyone that's done keto carnivore long term where it works short term. And I agree, like, especially if you're autoimmune, and we've talked about this, you're autoimmune, maybe mold driven,
Yeah.
and that's driving your kidney disease. But there's so many people that comment on the YouTube channel that tried carnivore and tanked their kidney, like they tanked their kidney function, their
Yeah.
EGFR
I've
20,
seen
30
quite a few.
points.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I think it's important for people commenting in the comment section where they're like keto cured, and I'm like, you have to be careful because that is it. It definitely hasn't been the be all case with me. In fact, I've seen it really ruin people's kidney function, and it's taken a long time. And sometimes we haven't been able to claw back the 20 points that it's tanked out on the bottom. We might get 5 points back. So I
Yeah.
think, you know, if it's autoimmune, mold driven, it will work short term. And again, I work in the realm of MS where people are talking about carnivore curing keto, and I've had patients do keto for years, and I've not seen that in practice. In fact, most of my keto carnivores give up after 18 months to 2 years because they actually get worse. Their microbiome goes out sideways, and they get a whole pile of electrolyte imbalances and end up with cardiovascular stuff, even when we're supplementing with electrolytes and things like
Yeah.
that. And they have to put stuff back in. So I really like, you can do keto, but you still need some plants in there, and you need to be, like everything you just said, looking out for methylation and things like that. I think there's a place for it, but kidney disease, you need to be working with someone that understands that, and you need to be checking labs, and it might be a short-term intervention, 3 months maybe. But I would be working with someone, I'd be checking my labs every 2 weeks to make sure that you're not going to tank kidney function and push up bone and nitrogen. That's my
Yeah. And
opinion.
like just understand your methylation. It's not so hard to look at that to me, like to look at methylation.
No.
It's big, and again, like methylation is not everything. It's just so often looked over. In fact, I'm thinking about someone right now that I'm working with, and as I'm going through this, I'm like, like I asked him to get to homocysteine level, and I'm really interested to see what it says now because I think it's a huge part of his story. And he's been on, you can cause damage with vitamins if you're a poor methylator. Like it causes some serious problems. And so I just think it's good idea to be really cognizant. They're not like nutrients are amazing and gentle, but when we supplement them and they're not the right form for our body, they can be pretty potent and cause some issues.
100%. And that's what I always say in, every podcast, make sure you work with a qualified healthcare practitioner, and
Yeah.
blanket statements like carnivore works for everybody. Even, like I hear lots of biohackers are like, everybody should be taking methylated folate. And no, I've got patients that can't go near methylated folate because they're over methylators, and that tanks them out the other way. So there is no one size fits. I mean, I've been in practice 25 years. There is no one size fits all. That's just not how we work as individuals. So that's what drives me, I think, a little batty about these big communities is like, this diet will work for everybody and everybody needs to do this. Or, you've got someone on Instagram promoting everybody should be on methylated Bs. And I'm like, I've never seen a blanket statement that will work for everybody, especially in the chronically ill sector. So I
Yeah,
think,
I agree.
yeah. Anything else you want to add about our friend methionine, Jessianna, before we wrap this up?
No, I don't think so. I mean, like the big takeaways are if you have ADP-KD, check your methylation status before you go too heavy protein either way because of this methionine component. If you have CKD, check your methylation status so that you can make sure you can utilize small amounts on a low protein or get it right. Possibly, if you're on a normal protein diet and you have stage 4 or 5, maybe even stage 3B, consider a lower protein diet guided by a professional so you don't, so you're not low calorie, low everything diet. Um, and those would be some important things. And then if you are working with a clinician who's prescribing a lot of supplements, supplements aren't bad. I mean, certainly you guys have some amazing products in your organization. Um, but if you're working with someone with a lot of supplements, just double check the ingredients because they might be the anti-inflammatory or the estrogen detoxification supplement or whatever. And it sounds good to treat what the problem is that you need, but you might need some a little bit more customized depending on your kidney function stage.
Yeah, no, very good points. And if you're looking for a really well-educated group of renal dietitians, you can head over to kidneynutritionalinstitute.org. I'll put in the link below. Jessianna, Lindsay and the team work with people all over the country, in fact, all over the world, with the amazing benefits of telehealth. And if you want to know more about what they do, head to their website. They've got a lot of great resources there and programs. And if you're a PKD in particular, they often run programs. I think September, you said, was the next time you're taking an intake to run through the
Yep. Hmm.
PKD. We'll put
Yep.
some information and we'll send it out if you're part of our database, and we'll make sure we post on our socials about that when that intake comes in, because that's a really great program. You get community support and you can work your way through that. It can be a cheaper way to access the practitioners and get to do it in a community form and actually help support each other. So I'm a really big fan of the KNI programs for PKD. So we'll put some information up for that and let everybody know when it's going on. And if you want to know more about what we do, our website, and what are we today, the 24th of June, our website is down at the moment, and it will be, by the time anyone views this, back up and running with our new website, so go and check that out. Make sure you hit subscribe and like, that way you will get notified anytime we put up more information. Please put your comments in, and if there's anything that you want Jessie and I to speak about, let us know. We are working our way through the amino acids in this series, so I can't even remember, I think, is it glycine or something's next? I have no idea what's
I
next.
think glycine is next, and I'm really, really excited about glycine because it is a super cool amino acid. I can't wait to dig into it a little bit more.
Yeah, glycine and cysteine are my big favorite amino acids that I use a lot. So
Our
yeah,
favorites, yeah.
yeah, they're my, if you were allowed to have favorite amino acid children, they're my favorite children. So we will dig into that one next time. Jessianna, as always, thank you for being part of our community and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. I always appreciate you and everything you bring to the table and everything that you're doing for kidney disease and being part of this narrative about changing the fact that kidney disease is treatable and maybe even reversible, which is very exciting.
Yeah, that's the direction we're going. So, all
I love it.
right, thank you again.
Thanks for being part of our community. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Yep, bye-bye.